Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's NFC East Day around these fine parts, and oh, what a division we'll dive into. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. But before we kick things off with four somewhat interesting football teams, I want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners out there, go to FanDuel.com, use the promo code BetTheBoard to take advantage of your no-sweat bet. It's up to $1,000, absolutely risk-free. It doesn't matter if you're betting NFL preseason, you're betting Major League Baseball, win totals, you name it, FanDuel has you covered just in time for this football season. It's FanDuel.com/BetTheBoard or use the promo code BetTheBoard. They'll have you taken care of. And Payne, I thought the AFC East that we previewed last week was relatively intriguing from top to bottom, a lot of reason for optimism for some of those fan bases. I kind of feel a little bit differently after deep diving the quartet of teams that we are going to deep dive here as it relates to the NFC East.
You are Mr. Negative.
I am not Mr. Negative. I am Mr. Realistic.
You gave me a dose of that realism this morning about 5 minutes before recording.
Yeah, probably a little bit here and there. You know, that's what I do. I'm here to chop people down when given the opportunity.
I said, do I sound sick or is it just in my head? And you're like, nope, you sound like shit.
Hey, you know what? If Matthew Stafford can go out there and throw no-look passes dealing with elbow tendonitis, you can podcast through a little bit of a head cold. But like we want to go glass half full, and we said over the weekend, it's probably best to get this out of your system now before the regular season grind starts, because people lean on you when the games are more meaningful. They don't care if I sound all nasally and completely congested when we start doing 3 shows a week.
That's a good point. Get it out of the system now and full speed ahead once the games matter.
So should we dive into these lovely teams, and we'll do them in alphabetical order to avoid any potential biases that are out there, as we saw some of our lovely social media community come after you for your take on the Dolphins and Bills, which left me scratching my head, but that's a different discussion for a different day. The Dallas Cowboys.
It only took until August 4th, 3 hours after the first NFL podcast of the season, to be called biased. Yeah. Yes. I try to put this in the right context here. If you can actually kind of sit back and think for a second that, you know what, this level of content, this level of deep diving probably took a substantial amount of time. And I'll just be transparent here. I think we've spent at minimum 25 hours on every single team. And a lot of these futures that we've bet, by the time it's all said and done, where you get down a little bit here, get down a little bit there, maybe add a future prop or a player prop that has a similar correlation to the win total, 5 figures down in some of these games. And the thought process apparently from this Bills fan was that we were just like, you know what, Dolphins fan, like the Dolphins over. That was the summation of the the time spent there. That's how we arrived there.
Hey, every now and again, you have your detractors, you have your most loyal and outspoken fans poking their heads out after a long off season. And so I'm glad that we were both able to laugh about that. But just peeling back the curtain of what we deal with sometimes as we break down a lot of these teams, not only for their season-long outlook, but we will, of course, on a week-to-week basis. But the Dallas Cowboys, Payne, America's team, 18-1 at FanDuel Sportsbook to win the elusive Lombardi Trophy for this proud fan base, plus $1.25 to win the NFC East. And when you look at their win total, currently sits at 10.5, shaded to the under. You have to lay $1.30. And of course, the last time we saw the Dallas Cowboys on the football field, it was the iconic quarterback draw at the end of regulation in their playoff loss against the San Francisco 49ers. When you look at this Cowboys franchise, they've made the playoffs 8 times since 2000, a feat that they actually accomplished 8 times during the 1990s alone, but that's neither here nor there. You can understand some of the disdain that Jerry Jones has for Jimmy Johnson as a result of all of this, but when you look at the Cowboys, they haven't made the NFC Championship in the last 26 years. They now have the 5th longest drought in the entire league to get to a conference championship game. And when you look at the Cowboys' record since 2000, they actually have a worse playoff winning percentage than the Cleveland Browns and the Jacksonville Jaguars. So when you're talking about where the Dallas Cowboys are as an organization, you can understand the level of frustration. And unfortunately for Cowboys fans, as talented as the roster was last year, there are some major depth concerns that Dallas will be staring down the barrel of this season, and a lot of them start on the offensive side, where Dak Prescott put up big gaudy numbers, but he's going to have his work cut out for him for a depleted wide receiving core in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, there's far less top-flight talent and depth on the roster, really across the board, but offensively, I think that's clear as well. Listening to some pressers, talking to some guys that have, been at camp thus far, Kellen Moore is using more motion and he's changing tempos pretty frequently, and I think that's probably smart, knowing that some of the talent we just alluded to is not there, that there's going to be more on Kellen Moore's plate. Hopefully this is a sign of good things to come. But the one thing we talked about last year in this same preview was that Kellen Moore does a good job with some motion rates, but those declined as the season went on. And then all of a sudden, his predictability with formations and play calling, that really, towards the middle part and end of the season, was just evident. And some of the efficiency declined because of that. And that's not anything new. We've been talking about this for a few seasons. It's almost like Kellen Moore goes out, looks at what he did last year, changes things up, but then once that change occurs and people adapt to it in the middle of the season, he doesn't have a counter to it. And so he just becomes really predictable, and the offense declines because of that. And I think we saw down the stretch, final 11 games, Dallas was just 6-5. The Cowboys O-line, I think that's really an interesting part of this roster, and I think it has a large variance element to it. Tyron Smith bounced back last season, played extremely well when he was on the field, got 11 games in. Really, I think that's probably solid, but he's 32 in December. He's played 13 games the last 2 seasons. When he's out there, still plays like a first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't know how often he's going to be out there in 2022, right? Some of the injuries that he has doesn't really feel fixable at this point, right? They're kind of just nagging, right? It's back. It's the same stuff that he's dealt with for many years. I don't know what it looks like, right? And then you have Tyler Smith. He's the rookie from Tulsa. He's dealt with some weird injuries over his career as well. I know there was an attempt to play him at tackle during OTAs, and there was some thought that maybe he replaces La'el Collins at right tackle, who's had back-to-back monstrous seasons for Dallas. Suddenly, when Dallas came back for camp, though, Tyler Smith's playing left guard. And there were some questions when Dallas drafted him 24th overall. There really was. Let's just see how that shakes out. Smith is going to replace Connor Williams, who had one of the better guard seasons last year. Zach Martin's plug and play, right? He's just all world. Terrence Steele, I think he's going to be the right tackle for now. And he's been horrific in camp, from what I've heard. He allowed a 6% pressure rate on pass rush snaps last year, among 88 tackles last season that played at least 275 snaps. Terrence Steele graded out 58th. Tyler Badish at center. He made some strides, was below average as a rookie, moved to above average in year 2. Let's see what year 3 looks like. But production from the center position the last few seasons hasn't come close to the Travis Frederick years. Receiver group, you hinted at there, Todd, at the top. Michael Gallup looks like he's not going to be ready week 1 from the recovering from the ACL injury. Jerry Jones inked James Washington to be the Cowboys' number 3 receiver. He fractured his foot in camp. He's possibly going to miss the first 5 games of the season. I love CeeDee Lamb. He is going to be a fantastic receiver, and the volume is going to be through the roof. But the data suggests when all the attention is on Lamb, his efficiency isn't quite the same. And we saw that in small doses last year when Amari Cooper wasn't on the field. EPA per attempt, success rate, and yards per attempt each declined for Lamb when Cooper wasn't on the field, garnering attention as well. Noah Brown is apparently having a phenomenal camp. Jalen Tolbert, the rookie receiver, has flashed some, but I think it's impossible to not drop the receiving core down a few notches from, previous iterations. Running back room is really good. Zeke has been the butt of the jokes and certainly is wildly overpaid compared to production, but I've heard good things about Zeke, looking more explosive, and a lot of people don't know this, but if you look at his numbers last year, he was fantastic the first 6 weeks. He's playing with a PCL tear that very few knew about, and when that unfolded, his numbers fell off a cliff from about week 7 onwards. Supposedly, he is very healthy. Kellen Moore's working in some 2-back sets where Zeke and Pollard are on the field at the same time. That could be fun. The rumor is Zeke's catching balls deeper downfield. Something to keep an eye on, whether it's Pollard or Zeke, because both guys are very good pass catching the ball. Dallas faces the easiest schedule of defenses in terms of defending running back passes. So we're talking about injuries and uncertainty to the receiver group, especially early on. That's something to maybe put in your hat there, put in your memory bank that we could see these backs catching some balls at least early on. I've also listened to a handful of Tony Romo media segments this offseason, specifically to get the vibe on the Cowboys, knowing he's still very juiced in over there. And Romo's suggested on offense possibly reverting back to 2016 and 2017 with a tad more running and possibly some more 12 personnel, something to think about there as well. Special teams obviously plays a role in scoring, so it's worth mentioning. The Cowboys are attempting to bring along a new kicker.
Good luck with that.
It's going like a fart in a spacesuit is what I'm hearing. So I don't know if they're going to find some veteran help, but the guys that they currently have been horrific in camp. Dak Prescott, I think we know what he is at this point. He's a top 10 quarterback. He is fantastic under pressure, something that he'll probably have to deal a little bit more with this season. Let's see, though, if he can remain that top 10 type quarterback when everything isn't picture perfect around him, right? When the O-line dips a touch, when the receiver group isn't as loaded, when defenses eventually catch up with Kellen Moore's ways, like they seem to do every season. Even with a schedule of defenses that projects to be bottom 5 in the NFL, I expect some offensive regression here for Dallas.
It's so interesting when you look at Dak. I mean, obviously a career high in touchdown passes last year with 37, so he had to be mentioned in the same breath as Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes. A touchdown rate north of 6%, but you dig into some of his other numbers, and not so much from the efficiency standpoint, but the win-loss record. And I know wins and losses are not always a quarterback stat, but it is interesting when you look at Dak Prescott, who owns a win percentage of just better than 41% against teams who finish with a winning record. He's done a lot of his fattening up against teams with losing records where he's compiled better than an 81% success rate in that regard. So very interesting for a variety of the reasons that you outlined, talking about Dallas and, potential depletion of weapons and how the philosophy could change on the offensive side of the ball. Now, defensively for the Cowboys, they go out and they add Anthony Barr recently during camp to try and bolster their linebacker position. You bring in Dante Fowler in the wake of the Randy Gregory debacle where the Cowboys thought they had Gregory signed. Turns out he was actually taking his talents to Denver. But so much of what Dallas did last year was predicated on takeaways. 34 led the league, 11 of those coming via the interception from Trevon Diggs. But the problem for Diggs, much like the rest of this Cowboys defense, it felt like it was feast or famine. Yes, there are stars in Diggs and Micah Parsons. There are major concerns along the defensive line. And if you're not able to force this many turnovers and create potential short fields, it's going to put a Dallas offense behind the 8 ball with a defense that should be middling for the most part.
This side of the ball is fairly basic, and I think we can be a little bit more surface level without diving into some of the minutia of every single player. But there is a slight dip in schedule strength this season, so that's nice. But it is, to your point, tough to fathom a repeat of 2021 where the Cowboys finished second in defensive efficiency, and there isn't a world where you can replicate those 34 takeaways. And what was mind-blowing to me is how those defensive takeaways turned into offensive points. The EPA gained on the Cowboys' defensive takeaways was the largest of any defense in a decade. And the one thing I try and do with data is compare and contrast. So I'm seeing all sides of the spectrum. So you see a Dallas defense that finished second in schedule adjusted efficiency, as I mentioned a few moments ago, but you compare it to how the actual players performed on the field and graded out. And there was such a massive dichotomy there with this particular Cowboys defense. It made my head spin. I was like, what is going on here? The Cowboys defense graded out on a player-by-player performance basis 15th. literally only DeMarcus Lawrence, Micah Parsons, Jaron Kearse, and Malik Hooker are the returning players that graded out substantially above average that played meaningful snaps last season. 4 guys. That's it. And when you look at some of the other metrics to kind of, again, compare and contrast, you look at both pass rush win rate and run stop win rate metrics. Dallas was outside the top 11 in both, outside the top 12 in tackling. The Cowboys were below average stopping the run, 16th in schedule-adjusted rush efficiency. I think forward-facing people and the public and the media view the Cowboys' defensive line as elite when really, they're a touch soft up the middle. But what really concerns me is Dallas went out. They signed Dante Fowler Jr., someone that Dan Quinn is extremely familiar with. He plays defensive end, obviously. Dallas went out and, as you alluded to, signed Anthony Barr. He is an outside linebacker, but he does play with his hand in the dirt on the edge quite frequently. And in round 2, Dallas went out and drafted Sam Williams, a defensive end from Ole Miss that had a 15% pressure rate, did have some off-the-field injuries that got issues that got cleared up, but I'm surprised that's where he was taken, but certainly Dallas felt like, hey, we need to improve our edge rush situation. I'm all for bringing in premium position players, but I sure as shit hope that this doesn't mean Dan Quinn is taking Micah Parsons' best attribute away from him and making him an every down linebacker and not allowing Micah Parsons to line up at defensive end. That would be a massive mistake. But when you bring those 3 guys in, it kind of indicates to me Parsons is going to spend less time on the edge. And I think that's a massive problem because if you look at Micah Parsons, he had a 24% pass rush win rate when he lined up over an offensive tackle last season. Only Max Crosby and Myles Garrett were better. Micah Parsons is simply not the same player when you strictly make him an outside linebacker because he's not a great run stuffer and you can fool him a bit when he's in coverage. So that's going to be really something interesting for me to monitor and watch with Dan Quinn. It's just tough for me to fathom that you'll have DeMarcus Lawrence back for the entire season. We know he missed the early sector of last year. You're bringing in Dante Fowler, who's only an edge. You're drafting Sam Williams, who's only an edge. And you have Barr, who can play with his hand in the dirt. It's like, what does this mean for Micah Parsons? And when you're not playing Parsons at defensive line, this really is a below average defensive line, Todd.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Cowboys team. We've seen it before. And the best historical example that this reminds me of, when you read about the Cowboys, you talked about the EPA created from all of their turnovers, was the Chicago Bears a few short years ago. And while obviously Dallas has a much more accomplished quarterback in Dak Prescott than Mitchell Trubisky, you saw that Bears team really fall off a cliff when the defense wasn't able to create short fields and put the offense in an advantageous position. So it'll be fascinating to see when you have a lot of those things lining up. As far as the Cowboys schedule, you look at how things start. Home games against the Bucs and Bengals. They go to the Giants, home against the Commanders, at the Rams and Eagles, and then they'll play host to the Lions and Bears before they get a midseason bye week. They do play a number of games against teams with short rest, but at the same time, I mean, Dallas could have their hands full even playing in the lightweight division from top to bottom that is the NFC East.
I completely agree, and this might be a team we get back to at the end of the podcast.
Ooh, a tease. I like the way you're going there, but we still have 3 teams to get to, so don't go ahead and hit that fast forward button, although I'm sure we've pissed off every Cowboys fan out there who believed this was the year they were finally going to be bringing the Lombardi Trophy back to Big D. From the Cowboys to the New York Football Giants, who see their odds to win the Super Bowl at 80-1 at FanDuel Sportsbook. They're 7-1 long shots to win the NFC East. And when you're looking at their win total, 7.5 shaded to the under. Lay $1.45 if you'd like to go under at FanDuel Sportsbook right now. Brian Daboll, of course, the headline of this offseason. He becomes the New York Giants' 5th head coach over the last 6 seasons. Joe Schoen comes in as well to handle the general manager responsibilities for Dave Gettleman. And when you look at the Giants, they have been the model of futility. They've gone under their win total each of the last 5 seasons. The Giants are just 15-25 the last 5 years in games decided by 1 score or less. They're a robust 12-28 straight up at home over their last 40 games. So no home field advantage to speak of there. But this team feels a little bit different when you're talking about some of the injury misfortune they had to go through last year on both sides of the ball. Offensively, we saw how dire things were when Daniel Jones missed time and they went through the Mike Glennon and Jake Fromm experience. In steps Tyrod Taylor, a couple of reinforcements along the offensive line. They focused on trying to get this team healthier, knowing that the receiving group that was extremely overpaid last year can't possibly be as bad as some of the numbers they put up a season ago.
I think the important thing to remember when we break some of these teams down, it's very relative to where they're priced within the market. So, you hear us be a little negative towards the Cowboys, but that's at a pricing of 10.5 wins. And, we might have some positive things to say in terms of the Giants' trajectory, but that's, again, you're looking at, a team in the 7 or the 6.7 range in the market. So just kind of keep that in context. I know a lot of people kind of lose sight of that when we talk about some of these teams. This is really a tough team to break down for me. The offseason required lots of frugal upgrades. We'll put it that way. And Joe Shane and Brian Daboll walk into salary cap hell. I think we all knew that going in. And as I look at this, Giants present day offense compared to what it was at season's end last year, I would say stock arrow up. I think you hinted at the O-line being upgraded a little bit through the draft and some cheap veteran bodies. Offensive health, luck, that should improve. Giants had the third most injured offense. The schedule of defenses the Giants face projects to be easier this season, and I think it's very likely just having a competent offensive mind and Brian Daboll do things more efficiently will yield better results by getting the most out of the talent that he actually has to work with. But this is still a long-term build-out in my mind.
When you look at
offensive line,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. I'll let you talk about the position groups because I'll follow up. I want to hear what you have to say first before I jump the shark here. So go ahead. Didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, I like the O-line a little bit here in terms of some of the progressions they can make. I think you're set at left tackle, and really, to me, when I watched games last year and then you follow that up with seeing if your eyes mesh with the numbers, nobody was really paying attention to the Giants last year and what Andrew Thomas turned into as a pass blocker. I mean, he was fantastic, one of the best in the entire league, less than a 3.5% pressure rate on over 500 pass block snaps. You draft Evan Neal at right tackle. He's inevitably going to go through some growing pains, but he looks like a bull and a plus run blocker day one. Interior of the line is interesting. A lot of veterans there. You bring over Mark Lewinsky from Indy. He was part of an elite O-line for the past few seasons. I think John Feliciano is a guy that we've probably talked about more than any podcast ever. He's slated to be the starting center. He just has an ability to handle blitz situations. He knows Daboll's offense. He's coming over from Buffalo. And then you have Shane Lemieux. I think he's got some question marks at guard, especially after a serious injury last season. It's possible their third-round rookie guard from UNC, Joshua Ezeudu, steps in at some point. Depth is certainly a question mark, but I think the line does have the ability to potentially fight to be average. And I think that's probably a breath of fresh air for Giants fans to hear. Receiver group is interesting, and you kind of touched on this, and it's the most expensive in the NFL, but it is it's a unit that grossly underperformed last season. And you look at when Giants receivers were targeted, it led to the second worst success rate in the NFL. So the unit is kind of being viewed forward-facing as an abject disaster. But to me, it's clear it has talent. And so when you look at Galladay, you look at Kadarius Toney, Shepard when he eventually returns, and while Wan'Dale Robinson was probably overdrafted, he's been solid enough through the early part of camp, and Daboll clearly saw a defined role for Wan'Dale Robinson when he drafted him. So you also look at the projected schedule. Giants are projected to face a bottom 5 schedule of pass defenses. So I think you're pointing the stock arrow up on the receiver group, even though it's wildly overpaid.
I mean, worst case scenario, they can always line up Andrew Thomas at wide receiver. He had more touchdown receptions than Kadarius Toney and Kenny Galladay combined a season ago.
Yeah. I just listen. You spent money on Galladay. I don't think he turned to complete dog food overnight. There's a reason he got the contract, even though it was probably more than he was worth. He had productive seasons, and you look at that offensive staff. Not good, right? And so I think this is where like the glimmer of hope for a lot of Giants fans and a lot of analytics guys and a lot of pro bettors are kind of viewing things for the Giants that just coaching alone is really going to improve this offense. Saquon's in a contract year. He's still just 25. And I think that's the interesting element with Saquon is that, like, Brian Daboll didn't draft him. So I think he's in the perfect spot in that if Daboll wants, he can run Barkley into the ground, give him carries and targets in the pass game. And if Barkley looks like the number 2 pick, something he hasn't looked like, Daboll's a genius. If Barkley gets injured again, that's the knack on Saquon. And the Giants owe him $0 past this season, and everyone just moves on. So I think we're going to get a decent Saquon Barkley this year. Daniel Jones obviously is a polarizing quarterback. And listen, if you watch Daniel Jones and know what you're looking for, there's certain throws he can't make. Shouldn't have been drafted 6th overall. But there is certainly enough to work with there, right? He's clearly superior to Sam Darnold, despite being thought of in the same light by many. And when you think about Daniel Jones' first 3 seasons in the league, it's been this revolving door across the board in that 2019, Jones is working with Pat Shurmur and Mike Shula. In 2020, it's Joe Judge and Jason Garrett. In 2021, it's Jason Garrett and Freddie Kitchens. Over those 3 seasons, the Giants' offensive line averaged out to be the worst in the NFL. The skill position talent around Jones had been injured at a rate far above the league average. And yet Daniel Jones over this 3-year period is in the 64th percentile in QBR. So horrific offensive minds that are constantly rotating, horrific O-line play, skill position guys that are injured through the wazoo, and yet Daniel Jones is above the 50th percentile. So I'm interested to see what happens there. Last year, when Jones went down with an injury, Giants offense averaged 1.2 yards less per play without him, dipped in EPA by 0.2 yards per play. So I think those are some interesting things. I think we're hopeful to see a better version of Daniel Jones in 2022, working with an improved scheme, game planning, play calling, offensive line, injury luck to the skill positions, and a schedule of defenses that projects to be bottom 10 in the NFL.
We know the Giants obviously declined the option for Daniel Jones in his 5th year. In your opinion, going into this year, do you believe Daniel Jones will be the starting quarterback in 2023 for the New York Giants when we're doing these previews a year from now?
I have no idea, honestly. I have no idea. I think at some point you have to figure out, and this will be the year if he's the guy moving forward. They were so bad last year with scheme and injuries that you really couldn't figure out if he was your future quarterback.
It's a fair assessment. I mean, it's all.
Listen, these are questions that, and I'm not trying to bust your balls, but right, these are like hot take TV type.
No, I understand.
I don't know the answer to that, and I don't think anyone actually does. They are going to go about this, and I shouldn't say I've spoken to them directly, but like Kafka is brilliant, right? Like, is this the quarterback that Kafka wants? Is this the quarterback that Brian Daboll wants? And ultimately, if they can get enough out of him, there's probably a situation where you sign him on a short-term deal. Or do you just say, hey, we have the confidence of the GM because we know that relationship's long-lasting, right? Joe Shane comes over from Buffalo. And I'm not trying to get into the Brian Flores stuff, and I'm not a corporate guy either, but you know how this stuff unfolds. There are situations in life where knowing the right people is how you get jobs, and Joe Shane and Brian Daboll have worked together forever. So I think the leash is long there, and that if we just said, hey, we won 7 games this year, we're still unsure if Daniel Jones is our franchise quarterback moving forward. Let's just say F it and move on. And even if we draft a young quarterback who isn't ready, and in year 2 we end up only winning 4 or 5 games, that's fine, right? Because hopefully in year 3 we've found our new rookie quarterback. There's also a situation here where you can say, hey, Daniel Jones is gone. We brought in Tyrod Taylor. He can be that stopgap for us next year if we want to go from 6 or 7 wins to potentially 8 or 9 by rebuilding the rest of the roster. Then we draft a guy a little bit later on, and that's how we plan for the future. I think they don't know at this moment. I really don't think they do.
No, I mean, it makes...
And I think they're going into this with an open mind.
It makes
that's truly what I'm hearing.
It makes a ton of sense. I mean, you need stability from your head coach and your front office, something the Giants have desperately lacked in recent years. And it's something you brought up a long time ago, talking about the NFL and being in quarterback purgatory. You either go all in because you truly believe you have a franchise quarterback that you can pay life-changing money and you pick up some of the pieces around him, or you're successful because you have a quarterback on a rookie deal. The last thing you want is to commit to a quarterback that can't take you to the heights where you want to be and isn't bad enough to have you drafting right at the top where you're able to bring in a franchise quarterback. So I think it's such an interesting season for all of those reasons with the New York Giants.
Here's the question, too, with quarterback play in general. And I'll propose this to you, and it's the question that every GM and coach ask themselves. If you have the 12th best quarterback in the league, what are you doing?
If I have the 12th best quarterback in the league, I'm probably looking to try and move on and catch lightning in a bottle so I can find a quarterback that puts me in the top 5.
Right. So, if that's the answer, then, 65% of the league or whatever it is trying to replace their quarterbacks every year. And that's never the case. So it's quarterback is such a finicky position to talk about. It just, I hate talking quarterback because it feels like that's what everyone in the world can only talk about. And it's like really the most undefined thing ever. Like we know who's elite. But if your answer to that question is I'm adamantly trying to replace the 12th best quarterback in the league, like this is a far tougher conversation than we've ever had before.
Well, you know my feelings. They're well documented around here. Yours as well on Jimmy Garoppolo. So if the Giants had him, it might catapult them to that next stratosphere. So they'll figure out what direction that they want to go in from an offensive standpoint. But there's no doubt the burden of proof doesn't fall entirely on Daniel Jones. He needs more help from his supporting cast. Defensively for the Giants, they draft Kayvon Thibodeau with a pick coming in the top 5. They bolster a couple other positions there, but the biggest deficiency that they'll have could be in the secondary, where you lose James Bradbury, you lose Logan Ryan, no more Jabril Peppers. You're talking about Leonard Williams, whose production has begun to decline along the interior of that defensive line, but there are reasons for optimism with Dexter Lawrence's stock trending in the right direction. You look at Azeez Ojulari, could benefit from a much heavier blitz scheme in his sophomore season with Wink Martindale, the new defensive coordinator there. But for as many questions as we have about the Giants offense and what that group will look like with the coaching change defensively, you would hope that a change in philosophy could pay dividends, especially as the Giants have some depth concerns on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, we know Wink's pedigree in his past. He comes over from Baltimore, spent 10 seasons there at defensive coordinator, and I think we've just grown accustomed to his aggressive ways and his desire to light the quarterback up by sending blitzes, and that's really just what his MO is. He's sent the highest rate of blitz of any defensive coordinator of the last 4 seasons. Now, ultimately, that is why Baltimore chose to move on, because Wink didn't show an ability to adapt or change that philosophy. But when I go back and look at things, I really don't think that philosophy was wrong. The philosophy worked. It didn't work last year because Baltimore had the second most injured defense and the secondary was decimated. And when you pressure at the rate Wink does, it forces your corners to hold up in man. But if your elite secondary is in shambles, that's pretty difficult. So for me, I think Wink's a damn good defensive mind. I do have some reservations with how it works for him out of the chute because, to your point, I don't see a ton of talent or depth on the Giants defense. And so, for me, this season defensively for the Giants comes down to a few things. It's can Adoree Jackson stay healthy? When Adoree's on the field, he's been an elite cover corner. Since 2019, he's allowed the second fewest yards per coverage snap, and he's only been targeted on 12% of passing attempts. That's the 5th lowest rate. So, teams are not targeting him, and when they do, it doesn't go overly well. Can Aaron Robinson make that year 2 leap? He was drafted to play in the slot. Wink's moving him outside. Robinson only played 43% of defensive snaps as a rookie, but they were quality snaps. Only allowed 5.6 yards per coverage snap. So I thought that was pretty solid for him. The bottom 10 schedule of both passing offenses and pass protecting offensive lines, I think when you look at that, that probably lends itself to allow Wink to blitz a little bit, right, at his normal rates and not be punished by lesser caliber offenses. And I think the one thing that we've always talked about and why specifically Kansas City and some of the better offenses always had a little bit more success against Wink's defenses is because good offenses attack the attacker. Bad offenses don't always have the ability to do that, and you can kind of get away with being overly aggressive, and the schedule suggests that could be the case this year. Love Xavier McKinney, versatile safety. Blake Martinez will be back healthy in the middle of the defense. Leonard Williams, coming off his 2nd worst season. He's always been solid, but never elite, especially as a pass rusher. delivered an 8% pressure rate on pass rush snaps last season. Dexter Lawrence coming off his worst season. I don't know. I don't know what's going on with that interior of the line. The namesakes are great, but it's just it doesn't always meet the production level there. He was a liability after being called out a little bit last season. Both, I think, are playing for their futures. So money years for the two guys in the middle. Magically, some things can change there. Kayvon Thibodeau apparently has been unblockable for the early portion of camp. I don't know who's going to play opposite him. We've talked about Azeez Ojulari. He's probably the candidate there, but he's landed on the early season PUP. I don't know what Ojulari is, right? If you look last year, you'll see the sack number, and it'll look fantastic. You'll be like, ooh, guy's going to take a next leap. But you look at how he graded out, and you look at that big sack number, but the actual like pressure rate and the actual hit rate, it doesn't yield that many sacks typically. So interesting player there. He's going to need a big second year. Giants defense to me is one of the tougher units to project. Like I really like a few of the young pieces. Coaching improved, certainly. Locker room and vibe is going to be a little bit better. Schedule of opposing offenses stink. And then I think the Giants' own offense improves. So the defense probably spends less time in the field and they'll be put in fewer negative situations. Giants defense spent the sixth most time in the field last year. So I think that is something that you have to think about a little bit. But maybe they can fight to be an average schedule adjusted defense. I think that would be a really positive and successful first year for Wink in New York.
Transition year for the Giants. It feels like we've said that way too often over the last 5 to 6 years at minimum for a franchise that was once viewed as a linchpin of the National Football League. They've recently scraped the bottom of the barrel. We can only hope that the change in the front office and a head coach gives New York Giants fans reason for optimism, and this can be the first step along the journey to restore them to a level of competitive balance and respectability. Want to remind?
Here's the thing.
Go ahead.
We've talked about the Giants probably longer than we should, and we kind of went left there and talking quarterbacks for a little bit there between offense and defense. The Giants, to me, and this is gonna maybe sound a little weird to people, but they've been horrific. Obviously, the last 5 years, easily, you can make a case for them being the worst franchise the last 5 years in terms of like wins and what they have done. And now they're being priced at 7 wins. And all of the guys that are probably most in tune with the Giants and this coaching staff are the ones that are saying, wait and see. Whereas, you kind of just poke around the internet. And the guys that listen to podcasts like this, I think, tried to get cute and get out ahead of us and just assume that we were going to be all gung-ho on the Giants. And so we've seen a lot of people really cozy up to the Giants this year, right? Going over 7. There was some 6.5. Like, if you got 6.5, like, good for you. I think that's probably not a bad number. But we're talking about a team that hasn't won more than 5 games in the last 5 years, and everyone internally is saying like, hey, like this is going to be a long-term rebuild, and certainly there's some nice pieces here where coaching can make them take the leap. And I understand the NFC is a shit sandwich, so someone has to emerge, and there's very likely one of these like middling to poor teams that can make a run, and so we're just going to choose the Giants because of Brian Daboll. But getting to 8 wins isn't going to be easy here, right? Like it's not. So I'm interested to see how this unfolds.
Varying degrees of garbage in the NFC will be a recurring theme as we break down all 4 divisions, knowing that the balance of power has clearly shifted to the AFC. So rinse and repeat as we go through all of it, but an interesting team nonetheless to see exactly what they bring on a week-in, week-out basis. Want to remind all of you to follow Payne on Twitter. That's at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You, of course, can follow me there as well. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod for all sorts of off-season updates that'll be coming from now until kickoff. From 2 teams in the division, we'll move to the Philadelphia Eagles, who see their price to win the Lombardi Trophy 30-1 at FanDuel Sportsbook. They're plus 185 to win the NFC East. That's a number that's come down considerably from where it opened at a price flirting with 3-1 earlier this offseason. And as far as their win total, 9.5, but you do need to lay $1.30 if you're inclined to go over that number. And when you look at what Coach Sirianni did, he became the third coach in franchise history to make the playoffs in his first season. The Eagles and Falcons, though, were the only teams in the NFL last year that didn't beat a single playoff team. And when you look at this Philadelphia Eagles team, I mean, they were significantly better offensively, obviously, against some of the bottom feeders than they were when they had a step up in class. As far as their offense is concerned, this is Jalen Hurts' team, at least for 2022, and I think it'll be a fascinating watch to see how he can lead the team. Last year, they had a flipping of the switch where they went from a very pass-heavy team early in situations to looking to lean on the ground game and cater to the offensive line's primary skill sets, along with Jalen Hurts and a deep backfield. But Payne, when you look at Philadelphia, optimism reigns supreme in the wake of the improbable run of the postseason last year. Do you feel that's well-founded and something that can be replicated in the city of brotherly love?
Making the playoffs again in the NFC might not be like as great of an accomplishment as kind of what people would think on the surface. I think the team can make some strides, though. I really do. I think this team has the ability to be improved. I think offensively, things can really take shape if the quarterback position and play improves. And I think, when you look at Jalen Hurts, we know a couple things. He's a worker. He's a professional. He clearly made strides from rookie year to last year, even though he wasn't an immediate starter as a rookie, and the offensive coaching staff completely changed. And I think you have to really put it in that context, in that this is, to me, truly Jalen Hurts' second season, right? Where we see quarterbacks potentially make that, air quotes, year two leap, because he didn't play a ton as a rookie. And he did have that coaching staff change heading into year two. So I think this is the year that really, truly matters for him. You look at the tape, right? The footwork was a little bit cleaner, played within the structure of the offense a little bit more, and he did process a little better as well. Now, nothing's perfect, right? And he is far from it in a lot of categories. He still holds on to the ball forever, still had the longest time to throw, and even though, again, improved, Hurts still plays out of structure a little too much, and he doesn't locate open guys and leaves clean pockets and runs into pressure far too often because, as crazy as it'll sound, his pocket presence isn't great for someone that's mobile, that is that mobile. And I think that's maybe the confusion sometimes with fans. It's like, Dan Marino, you could time him his 40 on a sundial, but he has pocket presence. Jalen Hurts, one of the fastest players, at the quarterback position, doesn't have great pocket presence. It's completely different. It's two different things. To Jalen Hurts' credit, though, his athleticism's through the roof. So his pressure to sack rate was just 13%. So Hurts was able to avoid sacks at the best rate among qualifying quarterbacks when he was pressured, and that allowed the Eagles' offense to be explosive. But many times Hurts put himself in those pressure situations, and that's evident by the Eagles' O-line finishing third in pass block win rate, but Hurts being pressured on more than 37% of dropbacks. It was the fifth highest rate among quarterbacks with at least 400 dropbacks last season. So when you again, it's about taking all of the metrics, understanding what they mean and how to incorporate them. So, you just look like, pressured 37% of dropbacks. A lot of them were on him. There's also some other areas where things weren't great. Eagles couldn't really be versatile because Jalen Hurts doesn't have an ability to play under center, really. So shotgun usage rate was 18% over league average. And then you look at Hurts, despite having the fourth highest deep ball rate, which is 29th in deep adjusted accuracy, 33rd in quarterback rating on deep throws as well. Eagles playoff game against the Bucs, I think that was really eye-opening. You could kind of see it happening live, and then when you watched the All-22, it was like, ooh, this is ugly. So basically, what transpired there was Tampa was confident in the interior of its defensive line being able to stop the Eagles' run game. So Tampa would just flood coverage outside, knowing Hurts refused to throw over the middle, something we chronicled a lot last year about Jalen Hurts only throwing to certain parts of the field. And that's really the reason the Eagles went out and got A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown kind of fits the play action RPO based system, and the vast majority of the damage comes in on these in-breaking routes. Although A.J. Brown's good to all areas of the field, and he's shown an ability to beat press man coverage virtually when he lines up anywhere. But let's see if Hurts is willing and improved enough throwing over the middle to get the very most out of A.J. Brown's skill set. That'll be something that we're going to monitor a lot this season. Going backwards a little bit, we talked about, again, not being able to throw to the middle of the field. And to combat some of those issues, the Eagles finally realized what defenses were doing after about 6 games. So Philly became aware they weren't running enough, especially on early downs, and that Hurts wasn't throwing over the middle. So defenses would just sit back in coverage, let Hurts try to thread the needle outside of the hashes where all the coverage was. And so Philly became a far more run-dominant team from week 7 onward when they saw the light boxes and they saw the middle of the field being unoccupied. And that's when the offense started to improve a little bit. So word out of camp is that Hurts appears to have improved throwing over the middle. He's improved a little bit getting the ball out on time. Those things have been slightly better. To this stage, the beat writers claim it's not as improved as much as expected. Let's just see what this looks like. I mean, everything around Hurts has improved, right? Philly's O-line has a chance to be one of the league's best. It was top 4 last year in both adjusted line yards and pass block win rate. So they can create holes and get the ground game going. They can keep the quarterback clean when he releases it at a normal time. I would expect a year 2 leap from Devontae Smith. That should happen, right? Just his game growing, less attention paid because of Brown, along with Hurts getting better. Smith was in a negative pass-catching environment last season, but he still made the best of it, finished 11th among qualifying receivers in formation-adjusted yards per route run. He was 11th in target separation against man coverage, and then you throw in some other guys, right? You still have Quez Watkins, you have Miles Sanders, you have Gainwell. Those are all explosive guys. A.J. Brown, obviously a bona fide number 1. Dallas Goedert's snap count should increase, which is a positive. The only thing past the improvements of Jalen Hurts that I'm not sure about is Philly's number 2 tight end. Can Philly find a second tight end that they're, comfortable with playing enough to increase rates of 12 personnel? Because Hurts metrics soar with 2 tight ends on the field. So that's something to monitor a little bit. There's also a big leap in schedule of defenses faced here, Todd. Hurts goes from facing a bottom 5 schedule of passing defenses to a fringe top 5 schedule. So we're going to need to see some leaps made from Jalen Hurts. And obviously, if he can make those leaps while the schedule of passing defenses increases, it bodes well for his future in Philly.
Hey, a broken record in the NFC East. Another team trying to figure out if they have the heir apparent and a franchise quarterback under center. Jalen Hurts will obviously have a lot more weapons that you chronicled at his disposal this season, and no real reason for excuses as he takes the reins right from the opening kickoff and will be the guy expected to get this team to double-digit wins if you believe in some of the odds makers' projections. For the Philadelphia Eagles, the defense will look a little bit different. They made some key offseason acquisitions. They go out and you bring in Hassan Reddick to try and help with the pass rush a little bit. Kaiser White comes in, James Bradbury as well, given the fact he was a cap casualty for the New York Giants, Jaquiski Tartt to fortify their secondary. And you pick up a pair of Georgia defenders in Jordan Davis in the first round and Nakobe Dean, who continued to slide amid questions about his durability and some of his injuries. Not a whole lot of real defections that should have a massive negative impact on this team defensively. And when you look at Philadelphia, they finished with the second fewest sacks in the National Football League last year with 29, despite finishing tied for 15th in pressures with 197 over 17 games, which bodes well for them going forward as we love to talk about regression. So much of Philadelphia's strength is based on the defensive line, where you have Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave. You can now pair him with Jordan Davis. But when you look at Philadelphia defensively, there's no doubt that up front they could be better, and you started to see Darius Slay return to his all-pro form, taking away one entire side of the field in the secondary.
It's an absolute certainty the Eagles' defense is better this season than last. There's zero question about it. Year 2 in a new system, talent upgraded, schedule of opposing offenses fall off a cliff. So there is a 100% chance of defensive improvement for the Eagles. Not even a question. I know Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox are getting up there in age. Word is Graham has looked fantastic in camp, and there hasn't been really any signs the Achilles injury suffered early last season is hampering him. Fletcher Cox, you mentioned, is getting up there in age, but he does have Javon Hargrave, he has Jordan Davis, he has Milton Williams to alleviate some pressure from needing to be all-world. That foursome, to me, is one of the most talented interior lines in the NFL. Josh Sweat and Derek Barnett were both re-signed. They finished top 7 in pass rush win rate a season ago. So again, to your point, sacks didn't get there, but there was a ton of pressure. They won those one-on-one matchups that were evident in the pass rush win rate metrics, and typically you'll see that regression start to yield more sacks. Hassan Reddick was signed from Carolina. He's had 23.5 sacks the last 2 seasons, finished top 10 in pass rush win rate himself last season. A position we talked about where the Eagles don't like allocating resources, whether it's money or draft capital, is linebacker. And because of that, linebacker's been a problem area, but suddenly, TJ Edwards, an undrafted linebacker in the 2019 class, has emerged and was fantastic last season. He hasn't really shown to have elite traits, and that's why he wasn't drafted. He was a standout at Wisconsin. It seems like his moxie, right, his ability, his IQ has really kind of carried over here. And if you look at TJ Edwards last season as a plus linebacker in every facet of the game, whether it was, stuffing runs to coverage to pressure to tackling, he was damn good. And more out of campus, TJ Edwards has been the most impressive defender this offseason. He's really taken on that leadership role from the middle of the defense. Then the Eagles went out and made an affordable signing with Kazir White. I believe it was a 1-year, $3 million deal. They went out, drafted Nakobe Dean. Now, to this point, and this probably won't make Eagles fans happy, and again, it's very early. We're like 10 days into camp. Nakobe Dean hasn't flashed yet. Just not making any plays. We'll see what unfolds there over the next, couple months. Hopefully he can be a contributor this season. The Eagles secondary, I think, upgraded in both starter quality and depth. Slay and Bradbury is a really nice 1-2 combo. It was shocking to me Bradbury's market wasn't higher than 1 year, $7.2 million. Bradbury right now, number 1 in forced incompletions over the last 2 seasons. He fits Jonathan Gannon's nickel system better than what the Giants were running. Slay, as you alluded to, had a very nice bounce-back season, finished 16th in adjusted yards allowed per coverage snap. Avonte Maddox really shined last season in his slot role, now that's a little bit more defined, finished 18th in adjusted yards allowed per coverage snap. He's a surefire tackler as well last year. I don't think Anthony Harris is ever going to, recreate his prime years in Minnesota at age 31, but he is serviceable. And word is Marcus Epps has made big strides this offseason, is on track to start over free agent Jaquiski Tartt at the other safety spot. And the gap is only widened through the first 2 weeks of camp. So expect Marcus Epps to be your starter at safety. Bottom line here, right? The Eagles defense is projected to face the very worst schedule of both passing and rushing offenses in 2022. This defense is going to make a massive leap forward here, Todd.
And if the defense plays better, it takes some of the pressure off Jalen Hurts, and you can understand why. The Eagles have been one of the biggest movers as far as odds to win their division. You've also seen a little bit of money come in on their win total over as well, as optimism reigns supreme for Nick Sirianni's second season at the helm for the Birds. Let
me ask you a very important question,
sure.
Todd. Jalen Hurts finishes the 11th best quarterback in a lot of key metrics next year. Are you moving on from him, or are you keeping him? I'm trying to.
No, I think it's a great question, and I honestly believe it depends on where you fall and how some of the quarterbacks grade out. So
you didn't even take the bait. I'm trying to find your cusp for keeping a quarterback.
I know you're going to go 11, you're going to go 10, and my cutoff is probably going to be in that 8-9 window. I want to make sure that you're in a qualifying position where you believe that when you're in the top 10 and a quarterback has a ceiling that they haven't scratched yet, that's a little bit different than if you take a quarterback who has been clearly defined. I think Hurts still leaves a lot of questions more so than answers, where you have a body of work for Daniel Jones. The one thing for Jones is he just hasn't had stability at the offensive coordinator or the head coach spot. I think this year will go a long way in determining what we feel Jalen Hurts can be going forward as the face of the Eagles and legitimate franchise quarterback, because I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I was a little bit surprised when they drafted Hurts as high as they did coming out of college. I didn't know what the plan was for him, so clearly Philadelphia saw more than I did, and I guess we'll either see if it bears fruit or they'll go, you know what? We took a shot. It didn't pay off. We're in the market for a quarterback next season.
And the Eagles have a ton of draft capital to really position themselves to move up the draft if they ultimately elect to move on from Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, so I mean, an interesting team for sure, because I think, we talk about the NFC and the fact that there really isn't that middle class. Philadelphia is a team very capable of taking the next step, playing in a soft division that can do a lot of things, using some of the momentum we saw from last year's improbable run of the playoffs, even a game where they were absolutely blown out by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Last but maybe least, in the NFC East this season, the Washington Commanders. You see the Commanders at 70-1 to win the Super Bowl at FanDuel Sportsbook. They're 5-1 to end up atop the division in the NFC East, and their win total, it sits at 8.5, but you do need to lay a substantial price to go under $1.70 at FanDuel. And when you look at Washington, I mean, this is a team seeking to end a playoff win drought that dates all the way back to 2005. We know the big season acquisition, at least on the offensive side, was Carson Wentz. You do draft Jahan Dotson in the first round out of Penn State to help with the receiving group. And maybe the quarterback of the future is on the roster as well. Sam Howell, who saw his draft stock fall considerably, a quarterback that never appeared to get better during his time at North Carolina after an impressive freshman campaign. You do lose a little bit along the offensive line. Brandon Scherf and Eric Flowers gone. Kyle Allen gone as well. And when you look at Carson Wentz, he becomes the 6th starting quarterback for the Commanders in 6 season openers, the 10th different starting quarterback overall. I mean, we talk about a level of instability. Washington has become the embodiment, especially under center. And you look at Wentz. We know how he fell out of favor with the Indianapolis Colts. I was stunned with some of the comments in the wake of his departure, but I guess that's what happens when you have the world by the balls and a team that some of us had called a dark horse in the AFC doesn't even get into the postseason because Wentz pisses all down his leg in the Week 18 game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Payne, when you look at the Washington Commanders from an overall offensive capability standpoint, I think you and I are both big believers in Terry McLaurin being underutilized because he hasn't had a quarterback, but can Wentz be that guy, and do they have enough difference makers elsewhere to make this team competitive?
So before we get to the offenses, I will say there is just so many varying opinions on Washington because of the potential they showed in 2020, right? And that potential had Washington spending in the 2021 offseason because the organization believed they were primed to take another leap. But I think, we should view Washington differently because it's really easy to understand that the 2020 season was smoke and mirrors, right? Like Washington made the playoffs, sure, but that wasn't a playoff team. It was a 7-win team that played a bottom 5 schedule. And then the 7 wins came against Carson Wentz, Andy Dalton twice, Nick Mullins, an aging Big Ben, rookie Joe Burrow, and then the Week 17 tanking Eagles that decided to have Greg Ward and Nate Sudfeld attempt passes in that game. And then all of a sudden, 2021, Washington played the toughest schedule in the league. Poor injury luck transpired, and there was zero improvement that was made. And now in 2022, we're projecting Washington to face one of the 6 easiest schedules again. We know there's opportunity in the NFC for a dark horse to emerge and make some noise, because that's it's the lesser conference, and even teams we envision being atop the NFC have some questions. And so all of these elements really have sharp guys I speak with on polar opposite ends of the spectrum with Washington this season.
It makes for a real interesting dichotomy because, this is a team offensively who you think has to get better, and a team defensively, to your point, that I think a lot of folks going into the 2021 season thought could be a prime regression candidate, and you saw it on full display when you're not feasting on the bottom 5 offenses in the league and inferior quarterback play. You can't really get over the hump. So can understand that completely. Are there reasons to be excited, I guess, if we go glass half full, and things to be optimistic about either on the offensive or defensive side, or do you personally see more things to be pessimistic about, that this is still a franchise continuing to flounder in its quest to find its way?
I think Carson Wentz is the main contention point here. You parse through some of Carson's numbers and you can paint a decent picture if you wanted to, right? And you can be like, hey, from week 4 through 16 last season, Wentz was 12th in EPA plus completion percentage above expectations. And that would sound like an upgrade over Taylor Heineke on the surface. But then you kind of look and you think about, Frank Reich being his coach, one of Carson Wentz's best friends as well, and Wentz operating a system he was familiar with, and basically Reich babying Wentz. And then you dig into some of the metrics that remove the system, the players around Wentz, and the elite running game that Wentz had supporting him. And Carson was an abject disaster. He was 33rd out of 36 qualifying quarterbacks in accuracy to all levels of the field, whether it was short, intermediate, or deep. And then you look at Wentz, he was in the 19th percentile in on-target throws from a clean pocket. And word out of training camp is, again, at least through like the first 10 days or so, his accuracy's been a problem again. Carson's uncatchable pass rate the last 2 seasons combined is nearly 23%. So like 1/4 of Wentz throws are just not catchable. That's wild to me. But ultimately, if Scott Turner can continue doing things that he did last year to assist the offense, and he did some great things, right? Like I know like production sometimes isn't always there, and fans and media will look at the scoreboard and be like, this offensive coordinator needs to be removed, but he clearly has an understanding of what he's doing, right? It's an offense that used motion rate at a top 5 rate, right? Used play action at a top 5 rate. Those things are going to help Wentz. The thought process is, I think when you bring in Wentz, that the short pass game could maybe decrease a little bit in efficiency, because that's where Taylor Heineke excelled. But with a guy like Terry McLaurin, who has elite deep speed, and, an explosive, second-year guy in De'Ami Brown, that maybe our offense should expand a little bit, be a little bit more vertical, be a little bit more explosive, because they were dead last in average depth of target again. Carson Wentz, you look at him, the one area where he was respectable last year was on throws of 20-plus yards, 9th out of 24 qualifiers in adjusted accuracy on deep throws. So maybe that's what we're going to see from the offense, is just a little bit more verticality. Again, we all love Terry McLaurin. I think, fantasy guys have grown a little bit more accustomed to him. I think probably if there wasn't fantasy football, he wouldn't be as highly acclaimed, but this is an elite guy. I mean, he is, to this point, proven to outperform the quarterback situations. He's got a 2.5% drop rate since 2020, which is a top 10 mark. Led the league in contested catches last season. Managed to be not your typical diva wide receiver, despite only 70% of targets being catchable. That would be a frustrating rate for me. Antonio Gibson, when you look at him, he's slimmed down a little bit. That's what competition will do. I know Brian Robinson was drafted in the 3rd round. Jahan Dotson appears to be the real deal as an underneath weapon and looks like wide receiver too. You need De'Ami Brown to take that year 2 leap, though, and then you need Curtis Samuel to get healthy, and word is that that's still not a thing. Curtis Samuel still can't string multiple practice days together. Let's see what that looks like. O-line, I think, has the potential to be sneaky good. Obviously, some questions there, but if guys can kind of replicate what they did last year, that's an interesting offensive line, right? Leno's coming off his best season ever. So it looks like a great sign, right? But he is 31, and a team that was desperate for O-line helped let him go last year. So can you replicate that? Let's see. Andrew Norwell replaces Eric Flowers. Norwell is solid. Never really lived up to the big deal in Jacksonville, but he projects to be a good starter. You have Chase Roulier, fantastic first 8 weeks last season. Then he broke his fibula, still recovering. Let's kind of keep an eye on him when he returns to full practice. Trey Turner had a bounce back year in Pittsburgh, but he was horrific the year prior. And then Sam Cosmi coming off a solid rookie season that nobody really ever envisioned happening. So again, if you can get all 5 guys to replicate last season's production, you have a real solid offensive line here, but it is tough to fathom all of those things kind of unfolding simultaneously. The ground game gets going, which is possible. Washington is projected to face one of the worst schedules of run defenses. And then with Scott Turner using some of those high rates of play action, I think we will see far more explosiveness from the Washington's pass game this season, Todd.
It's an interesting team. I mean, Carson Wentz has only been given so many opportunities for a new look, a chance to resurrect his career. This appears to be the final straw, so we'll see what he can accomplish in Washington if he can make this offense a little bit more explosive. Obviously, part of Washington's struggles last year were attributed to a defense that had their hands full. We saw them fall on hard times, from points per game allowed being 4th in the NFL to 25th. Third down defense was the 2nd worst in the league. The sacks and the takeaways also plummeted as well. And of course, the schedule of opposing offenses they face really changed that dynamic. Jonathan Allen is an absolute beast along the defensive line and arguably the team's most disruptive player. Chase Young, people will talk about, the defense missed his presence, but even before he got injured, he really wasn't contributing a whole heck of a lot. So they're going to need a little bit more from that pass rush And the secondary, when the pass rush started to slow down, the secondary was displayed to be a little bit of a sore spot there. When you're talking about Washington and this all-world defensive line that a lot of people came into last year crowing about, can they get back to a semblance of respectability, and can the stop unit perform at top 10 levels?
NFL X market is just getting buried right now as we are.
I'm watching the screen light up like a Christmas tree here on Monday morning.
I was not paying total attention there because of that. Defensively, Washington, yes. Listen, you're getting a breath of fresh air, I think, here, because you go from one of the toughest schedules of offense this season to go to a bottom 5 schedule this season. So that's nice. From the toughest schedule of passing offenses to a bottom 5 schedule of passing offenses. And that's going to make all the difference in the world, is who you play. And that's the reason we mentioned schedule ad nauseum. You go back to 2020, and Washington had a defense that was top 4 in both first and second down adjusted defensive efficiency. And then you had this increase in schedule in 2021. And so Washington's defense regressed to an average defense in first and second down adjusted efficiency. And you kind of pair that decline in early down defense with just random negative variance, and Washington's defense ended up being dead last in third and fourth down adjusted defensive efficiency. So easier schedule, some better variance, and things are clearly going to improve here. Now, the Jimmies and Joes need to step up on this side of the ball. The talent and namesake is certainly there. It does look like Chase Young's going to miss the early part of the season. Word is every player that Washington's tried to fill that void just hasn't popped yet in camp, whether it's Smith Williams or Tuhill. Zero production in camp thus far. And when Chase Young does return, what's the production look like? Right? One defensive rookie of the year in 2020, but in his 9 games last season, Chase Young was in the 12th percentile in pressure rate among qualifying edge rushers. Looks like $1 million getting off the bus, total Tarzan, but he played like Jane through half a season last year. Montez Sweat apparently added more pass rush moves to the repertoire this offseason. He battled a broken jaw, missed some time with the big C, but in his 10 games last season, Sweat finished in the 21st percentile in pressure rate among edge rushers. That ain't good. I love Jonathan Allen in the middle. He's delivered a 19% pass rush win rate the last 2 seasons, but the D-tackle position lost depth with Ioannidis and Settle leaving in free agency. But, we should see an uptick with overall pressure because Washington faces a much easier schedule of pass-protecting offensive lines. The secondary, I do think you see an uptick there, right? Schedule of passing offenses regresses at the highest rate in the league year over year. William Jackson had a down year after signing a large contract. Word is, feels more comfortable in Jack Del Rio's scheme, and we kind of saw that improvement from him as the season went on last year. I mean, he was horrific early on, but then he only allowed 0.48 yards per coverage snap his final 6 games of the season, so I think that bodes well for him kind of starting in a good spot and carrying that momentum forward. Bobby McCain became expendable for Miami after Jones and Holland proved they were ready to go pretty early on in their career, so Washington signed him late in free agency last season. He was solid. Cameron Curl went from 2020 7th-round pick to starter. He was solid in the run game and a sure tackler, but he's not a liability in coverage either, so that was a good combination. Linebacker room is the worst unit on the defense, but if Jamin Davis can improve in year 2, that'll go a long ways. Can't possibly be worse than last season. And then about 18 hours ago, Washington signed Nate Gary to help with that unit. So, overall here, Todd, stock arrow up on Washington's defense.
Hey, it's a good thing for people that are fans of one of the more dysfunctional organizations. And it's amazing that we can say that about not just the New York Giants, but also the Washington Commanders for everything that goes on the field and off the field. But clearly these teams benefit immensely from schedules that are relatively favorable going forward. So we'll see who can emerge atop the heap in a division where everyone is bunched up within 3.5 wins of one another, with 3 teams in that 10.5, 9.5, 8.5 range if you include Dallas, Philadelphia, and Washington. The NFC East, it's a division that hails in a number of key media markets, but you may not see that much football prowess. We did everything we could to break down some of the most compelling angles from a team storyline standpoint and personnel as you head towards the 2022 season. I want to encourage all of you to follow Payne on Twitter, @PayneInsider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. And most importantly, follow the podcast at BetTheBoardPod. Also, FanDuel.com. Use the promo code BetTheBoard. Take advantage of your no sweat bet. That's a risk-free $1,000 wager in states where available. Payne, you teased it at the top of the show talking about the Dallas Cowboys, and I'm sure you've had fans of America's team waiting on with bated breath, sitting on pins and needles, because it wasn't exactly the most optimistic portrayal of what you see from Dallas, but you've been known to surprise us before as far as best bets and investing opportunities in the NFC East. Where do you see potential prospects?
I like the Dallas Cowboys under 10.5 wins minus $1.30. That's right at FanDuel. Again, we broke the Cowboys down both sides of the ball in depth for nearly 20 minutes. It'll be time stamped above. Overarching, right? Just you'll lose some talent, you'll lose some depth. It's tough to replicate last season's takeaway number, the EPA gain from those takeaways. Again, we broke this down ad nauseum for roughly 20 minutes. Time stamped above, not going to waste people's time. But under 10.5 minus 30, that's the best bet for this podcast. And that's one that I know we attacked a little bit earlier on and still like it at this current number, especially as some of the wide receivers dropped like flies in camp.
Going to be an interesting division. Well, somebody's got to win it. We're not quite sure who it'll be, but clearly Cowboys win total a shade too high given uncertainty and a roster that's not nearly as talented going into this season as it was last year. Appreciate all of you, our loyal listeners, for tuning in throughout the course of the preseason podcast. Want to remind all of you that we did do the AFC East last week. We have all 5 power conferences for college football available and there for your college football homework with the season rapidly approaching. And we have 6 more in-depth NFL divisional previews still to come as we continue on our Monday-Thursday schedule right up until kickoff between the Rams and Bills on opening night. Payne, any final words of wisdom, final thoughts you'd like to share with our audience before we take about a 72-hour break and reconvene on Thursday?
6 more. Boy, that sounds daunting. Back Thursday. Hopefully a little bit healthier.
All right. You fight through adversity. If the injury report came out, you would have been listed as probable and you would have exceeded everyone's expectations. So I think that's all our listeners asked for. The quality of information remains unsurpassed, even if it's delivered in a slightly more nasal tone. For Payne Insider, I'm Todd Furman. Best of luck with all of your NFC investments this season. And hopefully with a Dallas Cowboys under 10.5 win total ticket in hand, we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.